Today, we talk about privacy in fintech and edtech. And especially, this is an area of concern because especially if I look at India as well as Netherlands, where we both are, most of the people are around, both the countries are seeing significant changes in their finance, especially if you look at the old school banking and today new school banking, right? So if I say old school to new school, there's a humongous change, right? Nobody goes to a bank and does money transfer in India. Everybody does a QR code scan. We do QR code scan and do Paytm, right? And if you look at edtech, right, in last few years, somehow all the local, the monopoly of local coaching institutes, right, are being killed day by day by the likes of Byju's, right, by the global investments. Billions of dollars are being put in, to kill that monopoly. And physics wala, right, it's a beautiful example, right, physics wala. So I'm just saying, right, so edtech and fintech are the new big things, were the new big things rather 5 years back in India and in Netherlands, but I think now they're much mature. And when they're mature enough, right, as an organization, we should talk about privacy, right? It's of concern now because they own so much data today that we need to talk about this, and we need to get ahead and also improve and works around something so that we reach somewhere, right? That is why today, guys, we are here. The goal of the session is to give you some data, answer some of your questions, but also tell you about fintech, edtech, and issues there. So today, my name is Akash Singh. I am co-founder of Tsaaro. I am CIPPE, CIPM, CIPD, all these FIP, IAPPs, right? So I'm a privacy consultant by profession, right? It's what I do most of the times is I would be working around implementation of privacy programs in companies. And also, I think most of the times I'm seeing around teaching some people, right, doing training CIPPE or CIPM, right? That's what I do most of the time. But today we have a special guest with us. Samrat Basu is here, and I know Samrat Basu from I think one year now, and I've seen through his journey of privacy. It's a beautiful journey. He went to Leiden, then he went to teach at Tilburg, and now he is at Bold.com. By the way, Bold.com is the biggest company in Netherlands of like Flipkart. If somebody doesn't know, if somebody is joining from India, it's like Flipkart of Netherlands. So and he works at privacy there. So he brings in a lot of perspective, a lot of mature perspective. There are perspectives in the world. Everybody knows something, but when you talk about maturity in privacy, I think he's the right guy to ask. And also because he has such a background, we can at least get some information from him. So Samrat, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So basically, my background is that I'm a lawyer. So after graduating from law school, I was very fortunate to be a part of, the Justice Sri Krishna committee, and I closely worked with Justice Sri Krishna and all the committee members in drafting the first draft of India's privacy law. Um, and during that journey, of course, that was my introduction. This is back in 2017, and subsequently, after working on that draft, I moved to Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, which is a leading law firm in India, as probably most people joining in know. I was working in the privacy tech media team there, and there I was exposed to a lot of these different issues and queries because there was global interest and a lot of MNCs moving to India or who had operations in India, such as Amazon, Google, Goldman Sachs, Unilever, Coca-Cola, all of these companies. So some tech companies, some even traditional companies such as Coca-Cola, Marriott Hotels, all of them were also interested in sort of figuring out how they can manage and implement privacy laws because they were doing in the process of aligning it globally. And I learned a lot there in my role. I was there for about 2 years, and then I wanted to actually move to Europe, get a master's degree, and hopefully do GDPR work after that at some point. So I moved to Leiden University. I did an advanced master's in law and digital technologies. It was a great year. I learned a lot. And after that, I moved to Tilburg University as a lecturer where I was teaching privacy and also tech contracts and allied tech law issues to the master students there, masters in law students, and also to the data science students. So I was introducing GDPR to data science students in Tilburg University as well. So that was sort of my the time that I spent at Tilburg University, and then I've always, I really enjoyed my time at Tilburg University, but I wanted to get back to the industry because that's what I really enjoy doing, advising companies and sort of figuring out these tough questions where there's there's no easy answer. So I recently joined Bold.com last month, and I'm already in the midst of so many questions on an everyday basis. And I'm fortunate to be a part of an organization which actually cares about privacy. So they take privacy very seriously, um, and they want to sort of try and implement it in their app ecosystem. And as Akar said, Bol.com is essentially like the Amazon or Flipkart of Netherlands. In fact, it's ahead of Amazon in the Netherlands, in the Benelux region, so Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. They are ahead of Amazon. They're the number one e-commerce platform in this region. So yeah, interesting work, and this is a little bit sort of about my background.
So Samrat,
Akash,
great
when yeah.
background. Yeah, great background. And I think this kind of excites us more to ask you more questions, by the way, and learn more from you. So, and I know people who are hearing you are already, thinking about some questions to ask you, right, and learn something out of this. So a bit about Tsaaro. At Tsaaro, we are privacy consultants, right? We do consulting around privacy. So when you hear about GDPR, and especially if you're in India and you hear about GDPR, you would definitely hear about us. And that's what we do most of the time. We do GDPR work, we do some ISO 27001 work. But disclaimer before we start the session, whatever discussion is happening, our speakers do not represent their companies, right? The discussion that is going to happen is not a legal advice, though I do represent my company. It's interesting. So moving on then. So the agenda of the session is we have 6 agendas, by the way, today. So we want to start with evaluating some fintech and edtech. Then moving on, we're going to talk about privacy issues in fintech and edtech. Then we'll talk about how do we prioritize data privacy. Then we'll move on to applicable laws, regulations, and obviously penalties, right? The beauty of privacy is penalties. And we'll talk about how penalties have worked, if they have worked out, and then we'll get back to Samrat on this. So guys, before we start this session, let's quickly do a Menti. With expanding revenue and market share of fintech and edtech companies, is there a proportionalize? You just have to go to menti.com and just choose whether you think that privacy issues are increasing or not. Or if you don't know about this, you can just choose maybe. And if you think it's a yes, just choose a yes, and then we can get ahead. 7 people feel that it is a yes, right? It is a big yes, and 1 person thinks it's a no. I think maybe the perspective of no is something that we should also talk about later, once we end the session. And I hope we change that perspective as well rather than a no, because privacy issues are very related to data processing issues, right? The more you process, the more issues are going to come, and the more learning is going to come for the company. And that's why I think when I started my job, right, we used to talk about how do we make a privacy program. But in last 5 years, right, in 2022, every time we have a discussion with the client, with the DPO, the question always is, how do we mature a program, right? Because creating a program, that stuff is done, right? How do we mature a program is something that comes to the mind. So yeah, I think it's a yes then. And so coming to the evolution of fintech, right? We're talking about how fintech has evolved. I think we definitely talked about it a bit, but definitely we would like to hear from Samrat. So Samrat, what do you think, when we talk about evolution of fintech from angle of data privacy issues as well, right? Like definitely fintech, but we are all privacy professionals. So we'd like to hear how privacy has evolved in fintech, right? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things to unpack here. So the first thing that needs attention is the fact that in the last 10 years, fintech has risen exponentially, and it's going to rise even further. But the question of privacy is not necessarily a fintech issue, because privacy is a question that will permeate across sectors. I think it's more of a issue with respect to the law and with respect to the 2017 judgment of Puttaswamy, which made privacy a fundamental right. So before that, even though there were privacy issues which were subsisting, they weren't really legal concern, to so to speak, unless they fell on those very specific edge cases of personal privacy, where or if someone breaks into someone's house, or voyeurism, or online sexual abuse, and things like that from a privacy angle. But really moving on to a fundamental right of privacy and informational privacy as part of that fundamental right has really changed the ball game in 2017 and further. So right now, every single company, that's not just a tech company, but any company which has employees, needs to think about privacy, right? Because privacy of employees is also a part of the fundamental right to privacy. So a lot of times, what I felt during my interactions with clients is that they only think about the customers privacy, which is obviously an important part. But in that conversation, they forget that privacy of employees is also something that they need to consider, and that's something that has been discussed and has evolved in Europe. So there are case laws around surveillance of employees in, say, a supermarket checking counter. There are other monitoring mechanisms of the laptop of employees. These are also like privacy issues that most companies, it doesn't strike them unless they've really been trained to look at these sort of issues cropping up. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I answered your question, but I think I raised a new point with respect to how it's not just fintech, but it's also, and not just customers, but also employees that companies need to think about.
So I think employees need to think about, I think, the perspective where we reach down to saying that, the employee of a fintech needs to think about, because are we referring to somebody like a software developer? Because most of the times when I talk about a fintech, or when you talk about a fintech, or when we talk about edtech, right, it's actually a software today, and the software is taking data. So would you like to also shed some light as to what are we talking about when a software team, the team which grabs data, right? How do we look at that, Samrat?
Yeah. So, okay, then shifting to the customer's perspective, what happens is essentially every single thing that someone does on an app or a website is tracked. So, where your mouse is moving, for how long it hovers in a certain area, what courses you're taking, or what financial products you're taking, what financial products are you potentially interested in? Are you interested in a mutual fund, a systematic investment plan? Do you want to buy commodities? Do you want to transfer money to your friend? Do you get salary payments into this account? Do you use it to pay electricity bills? Do you use it to recharge your phone? In the context of fintech, right? So there are all of these questions, and a detailed customer profile is typically created in order to generate more value for the customer. And this customer profile basically pulls personal data and tries to personalize it as much as possible. And this is something that we all know, of course, and we think that it's just the big tech companies which does this, like the Googles and Facebooks of the world. But that's not entirely true, because every single platform-based company is doing this to optimize their courses, their services, to push the right courses to the right set of people, and all of these issues and all of this personalization needs to be done in a certain framework which respects privacy. And it's just a matter of time when the privacy law comes in. But I think the issue is larger. Even if the data protection bill doesn't come in, the right to privacy at the end of the day is a fundamental right, right? So I think it's better for companies to start thinking about all of these issues, because they're consistently pulling data. And I talk to data engineers and UI UX designers every single day, and this is something that they just don't understand. They feel that more data is good. All these principles of data minimization, storage limitation, collection limitation. Uh, it's at loggerheads with someone who's been trained to be a data scientist or a data analyst, because they feel that if they can get more data, they will be able to create a better, more personalized experience for the customer, which would obviously also drive sales. So I understand that they're coming from a completely different point of view, and we are coming from a completely different point of view. And they're both important, because right to conduct a business effectively is also important for society at large. So we need to sort of find a way to balance this, because right now it's been, everyone takes as become like a data grab ki jitna le sakte hai lete hain, whatever we can take we'll keep taking, and doesn't matter whether we use it or not, kya pata 5 saal baad kaam aa jaye. That's the mentality that's there in India. And this will lead to problems down the line, because if you haven't really segregated and cleaned your data, and you're just like कि हाँ ठीक है data ले लिया dump कर दिया and then देखा जाएगा, you have all of this personal data about all of these different people. You haven't really cleaned it up or put it into structural use necessarily, just thinking that maybe I'll use it down the line. And maybe you are using it down the line, but you're not using it in the appropriate manner. And this will really, really lead to like immense cost to sort of figure out all of these different data sets. Because if you have a million customers who are going through your products, and you're tracking their every single sort of move and click, all of that needs to be stored somewhere, all of that needs to be cleaned and analyzed, and that's one part of it. And then comes the privacy part of it, because it needs to be handled in a proper manner. And and then data subject rights come into play, where right to access, right to data portability, right to be forgotten, all of these rights, if users start filing these requests and your data is all over the place, then what do you do?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think you kind of mentioned is the attitude of thought process, right? That jitna data hoga, right? And that thought process itself becomes a issue, because I can tell you I'm also part of the sales team of Tsaaro, right? And there are 10 columns sometimes, out of which one column is will never be required, and we know that,
Yeah,
right? But just because we asked somebody to create a form, right, and he kind of published the form, but we did not review well, and I'll be honest about it, and we are also always trying to improve our data collection practices, right, our
yeah,
own privacy notice, because that's what goes out in the market, right, as a privacy
yeah,
company. So doing that, I think kind of makes 100% sense. And also when you point out things like business comes first or privacy comes first, right, again, it's not a chicken and egg question, right? Business comes
yeah,
first, right?
yeah,
But business has to be done ethically,
yeah,
right? Business has to be done ethically. We cannot be not giving a privacy notice or without consent trying to do something, some analysis on a data. That cannot be possible, and that doesn't sound right at all.
yeah,
So yeah, I think out of a privacy law, and when we say right to privacy, we already have IT Act, and because of IT Act, at least we have the right to get data deleted. So
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that we are coming in a market of more than 1 billion people in the market, and it's beautiful how data in India will be managed with privacy. I think China definitely has done it, but I think because of COVID times and times of difficulty for China, I think we do not see enforcement as such, right? We do not see a lot of fines, but I think that is next, right? The two beautiful countries, so big countries, and interesting to see how companies will come in and talk about it. So obviously I've talked a bit about edtech. So
yeah.
let's ask another question, right? So guys, so do you think that the data, and I have this very sincere question, because everybody asks me this question, right? And every company today has a vendor risk program, a third party risk program. Every company in the world has, right? Even if there is a startup. So my question to all of you is, do you think that if data goes out from a singular company's environment, or should every processing should happen in your on premise or your own AWS cloud, let's say, right? And leave AWS cloud. If you're saying third party, then it's going to happen in your own premise, right? So should that be a issue of concern? Yes, no, or maybe. Guys, come on, let's just vote quickly and come talk about it. Just choose
And
yes, no,
please
or maybe.
feel to also like drop in comments with your reasons for yes, no, maybe. So like,
Yeah,
why do you think so? Because yes, no, bolna to theek hai, but kyun? I mean, and that's how the discussion will sort of build.
yeah. So my perspective, Samrat, right? I'll kind of give you my perspective, and then why don't you also kind of come with your perspective there. So one thing that I feel is, when we are a customer centric company, right, a
Yeah,
B2C company, especially a B2C company, I think in case it's possible, right, if it's possible for me, I always make sure after GDPR, I always make sure that once I take a third party, the third party gives me trust, right? If the third party doesn't have a privacy policy, I do not use that as third party, right? I do not even go to the website next, right? I'm just saying. So
yeah,
if this show trust, right? If we see trust, right, that their data transfer practices, internal practices are fine, only then my concern is not there. But other than every other time, I have a huge concern. sending data out to a third party, right? What's your view?
So I'm going to break this question down, and this is how I generally think. And yeah, and you can, all of you can sort of chime in on whether you agree. So the question is, in terms of data protection, is third-party data sharing also a concern for any industry company, right? So my first question, and if I'm going to approach a diligence or a question, or if someone sends me this sort of question, my first question will be, okay, what data? First of all, tell me, kya data? Is it personal data? Is it business data? Is it sensitive personal data? Kya categories of data? That's my first question. Then my second question is, who's the third party? Or third parties for which you're, and then the third question will be, what data sets are you sending to which third party, and why are you sending it? So the purposes, key, kyun bhej rahe ho? What is the necessity, what is the outcome, what is the plan, and why is this needed? So breaking it into these questions and categories is very important, because for each of these categories the answer will be different. Key data sharing is good, bad, not good, okay, not okay. Following these questions, the next question will be, how have we collected that data? Is it under consent? Is it under legitimate interest? Is it required by law? We need to store it. So, like, for example, I don't know, for a financial company, it's important to, store all bank transactions, right? Maybe you have some bank transactions that you want to delete, or you don't want your parents to know, or I don't know, anything, but for the company, and this is where sort of interesting privacy law questions also emerge. Data sharing is one thing, data deletion is one thing. So then what do you delete it, do you not delete it, do you share it, do you not share it? So for all of these things, I think it's important to first ask these questions. So my answer would be a maybe, it wouldn't be a yes or no. And the yes or no will depend on what is the data. Agar personal data nahi hai to karo data share, it's fine. If it's business data and it's helping you drive more sales, do it. If it's business data with respect to, okay, our course on data protection and privacy is selling so much in Delhi, not selling so much in Mumbai, this is not personal data. This is like it's just business information, like how many people are taking our course. But if those people are giving reviews to the course, that becomes personal data. So it's very important to understand and categorize different buckets of data, what data is being shared, and then to ask, who are these third parties that we are sharing data to. Maybe we want to share the data to within university, because then we'll integrate the course within a university setup, and students of that university can maybe get a discounted rate on that course. So that data sharing is good. So again, these are the sort of questions that you need to ask. And obviously, when we are sharing data, we'll have a contract with the university, we or any other entity for that matter. So I think kabhi bhi data protection ka question ho na, just think through these steps, and that will sort of help you in your journey as a privacy professional, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very well pointed out, saying that business data and personal data should be treated differently, and there is no foundation to business data. And but what I have seen is, see, most of the times when we are doing a vendor risk assessment, right, and when we are building the vendor risk programs, right, it's like, if you, let's say, you have an approach where, let's bring all the vendors together, right, in one central platform for the company, and then also see which vendor has PII, which vendor has SPII. That's what we say, right? It's so we had this SOX, right? So because of SOX, financial data became very important, and it was being audited very heavily, right? Till date, it is, right?
Yeah.
Any company that is listed in the US, so financial data is heavily audited because of SOX, Sarbanes Oxley. So, but today after GDPR, I think the same thing started happening with PII. So when the vendor comes in, right, you start segregating them already. Who has PII? Who has SPII? Who has company critical data? Which vendor is there? If the vendor is not there tomorrow, like for example, Microsoft and Intel, right? So at a point in time, if there wouldn't have been no Intel, there would have been Microsoft, right? So they had this dependency, but again, they both grew together and they became so big. But yeah, that is also a thought process. But I'm still saying, it's a lot of companies, what they try to do is they decrease risk, right? So when a vendor is small and they can kind of build two vendors, then they would usually not try to go with one vendor. So
Yeah.
I think we already talked a bit about issues in fintech. So in edtech, right? We talked a bit about fintech, but let's talk about edtech. So Samrat, when we talk about edtech, right, it's like when we look at things like IAPP, obviously if you look at edtech today, Byju's in India, right? All these unicorns, right? Every new day an edtech company is a unicorn in India, right, nowadays. So
Yeah.
what do you think, in terms of when you look at data privacy issues, right? What would be your, top concerns in a ed tech platform, and what they are thinking right now? Or if there is no law, like in India, there's no law, that the use of data is too free flow. And I'll tell you, earlier what used to happen is, there were these banking organizations, right? Like banks. So they used to
Yeah.
sell our data to the third party vendor, and that third party vendor still calls me and says, Akash, would you like to have a credit card? Like, I honestly, it's such a pain, right? I want a credit card, I'll just apply for it, or I'll get it. But I've been consistently telling them, hey, I do not want a credit card, and please forget me, right? And they don't want to forget me, right? It's such a problem, right? After activating DND and everything, I'm still getting calls. So I'm saying that this is just the start, right? Same thing is happening in edtech today. So if you have a child, right, who's like in 11th or 12th, right, you would get calls from all of them, right? Everybody would have, identified your kid as a student and would be
Yeah.
calling you as a parent, to sell you a course, right? So what do you think, are the biggest issues? And this is just one issue that, I can tell you right now, but I just want to hear your perspective also, right? So yeah, over to you, Samrat.
Yeah, so I mean, there are so many issues, but I think like the first thing that we need to see here for education platforms, especially most of these edtech platforms, is that the students who are taking the course are minors, right? So right off the bat, they need to be super careful with the data that they're tracking as an edtech platform. And it's not just that they're data of minors, it's also their biometric data and also their intellectual capability data, right? Because there are assessments that are happening, and we are sort of as an edtech platform able to gauge intellectual capability of each student in a certain area, right? And these sort of are in the gray area of biometric data because um, there are classes which are happening where the video cameras are on, and during the class they are giving an opinion, or there's a discussion going on. So video is obviously biometric data, but at the same time we are able to sort of think and see through what their thought process is, and all of this is obviously recorded and stored and then used for future classes. So if all of these activities are happening, there are definitely privacy risks in all of these activities. And it may be difficult to take consent of all the students to ensure this goes on, because a lot of times it may not be a free consent, because students may not have the sort of knowledge to actually understand what they are consenting to. And they'll probably have no clue. मतलब course करेंगे चले जाएंगे 5 साल बाद, how their data is being used, they have no clue, right? And it's not like they're going to go back, अच्छा 5 साल पहले I did this course, मेरा data वहाँ है, मतलब what is happening. So I mean, these are sort of the issues that are coming in, and these are the issues that all of us sort of need to think about. And there are no easy answers कि ऐसे एक session में I'll be able to tell you अच्छा this is the way to do it. That's not the case. It's a continuous process. And I think in these sort of situations, what is most important is to sort of have ethical principles. Ki, okay, I'm going to take care of the data. I'm going to, collect it responsibly. I'm going to use it responsibly. I'm going to make sure that, the students are aware that, look, we are using this to help other students. And if you're not okay with it, you can tell us. We can blur your face, or, there are 10 different ways to sort of approach this. So yeah, the importance is to come from a place where you actually care about privacy, and you want to make sure that the privacy of your clients, which are the students, are protected effectively. Because aaj nahi to kal, you don't know. Because if you've collected data 5 years back and 1 year later the data protection law comes into force, It doesn't have retrospective application, but because you have that data stored, from that day, that data protection law will hit the data that you've kept stored but not used for so many days, because storing is considered to be a processing activity. And you won't even realize it that you have so many sensitive biometric data. You wouldn't think कि video biometric hai, but hey, so and you just have these recordings just lying around, and you don't know when, because under data minimization, storage limitation, a lot of these principles will be violated, and under law there's no requirement to store these videos, right? So yeah, so these are concerns that edtech platforms need to start thinking about now, because at some point, whenever the law comes into place in India, they're going to be in trouble. And not just that, if they expand, like if they do really well and they expand to say Europe or something, and they're hit obviously by the GDPR then, or if they start targeting or they develop courses, GDPR courses, and then there are Europeans also, taking their course because their course is so good, then the GDPR is hit. And the moment GDPR is hit, then all of your processing activities, storage activities, data transfer activities have to be in accordance with the GDPR. So anyway, these are issues that you will come into play. Either if the Indian law comes into place at some point in the future, or if you do really well and start expanding outside India.
Yeah, it's very fair enough and very well put forward. In terms of issues when we look at what happens tomorrow, right? The data that we have,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you a sweet case scenario. What happened? I was sitting with one of the biggest multinational companies of India. I was sitting with the DP when we were just discussing, and what he pointed saying is, he said, I don't know how much data I have in my Salesforce CRM, because people who came in and built that CRM and started using that department, they also left. And in the age of iteration, right,
Yeah.
people come and leave, and there is, because they did not have any guidelines or procedures to delete the data or tag it to retention guidelines, the data is just there, right? And nobody knows how to fix that, right? And there are chunks of data, and legacy systems specifically run through some data management, which the company is still trying to understand, because legacy code is legacy code and people who wrote them are not there, and nobody
Yeah.
remembers how it is done. So it's beautiful world that we live in, but I think the future
It,
seems bright because
it's the recipe for the perfect data protection storm. And if it hits you, you don't know what will happen. क्योंकि कितना millions in fines you're going to face as an edtech platform. And obviously, I don't think in this webinar people who are the promoters of these platforms are there, but lawyers who may work for these platforms today or maybe down the line are present, or maybe they may be consultants in law firms or consultancies helping these firms sort of comply with privacy. So these are some of the issues that you need to keep in the back of the mind and sort of ask the tech people and whoever is in the board, we need to sort of document everything, and then we need to delete stuff that we don't need. Yeah.
yeah, I think specifically not just that. I think this, what we see is we have a YouTube channel, and we have quite a few subscribers in the industry. So I think even if we are talking about this and this is going to go there, so we usually kind of, this knowledge gets spread out, and people do definitely take some right steps, right,
Yeah.
after listening to this, or maybe bringing a change, because honestly there are tons of books to read and there's so much material online. But when we talk about things that we can implement, we reach to same thing, same conclusion. So it's always better to use experience, right, as well. Coming back to Menti, by the way, do you think that brand value, I know everybody says Apple has the best privacy, and that's where Apple is selling at, right? See, the world's biggest trillion-dollar companies are selling on privacy. So it's a fact nowadays, but I'm just saying. So do you think that prioritizing data privacy will improve your brand value? Yes or no?
I think
Yes, I think so.
just to sort of make a point here, we can see what happened to Meta's Facebook share values after Apple introduced do not Apple ATT, do not track. It's just like been in a free fall for the last 1 year since the introduction of Apple's do not track, and that just goes to show how important data is and how important privacy is. So if and everyone knows that Facebook does not have the greatest sort of privacy practices. So yeah. It's a
Yeah,
big difference.
and once upon a time, so again, this is not a comment on anyone or any company, but once upon a time I was teaching, right? And we had two lawyers from Meta, right, while we were teaching, and it's obviously it's so super confidential information, but we're just discussing about it. But honestly, while talking to them, I felt that that company has understood it, right, and they are working on it. But I think they have gone in such a wrong direction for so long that it's
Yeah,
getting very
it's a
difficult
big
for them
company,
to
right?
come back.
And in fact, I think now it's obviously a legal issue. So now they are making big changes, especially in Europe. But I think that's the problem. They are only making changes in Europe because GDPR is there. They're not doing it globally.
Yeah,
So I think
that's very
it's
true.
again it comes back to the principled sort of view that okay, do we care about privacy? Should we implement this from ground up? Or do we just care about it क्योंकि law बोल रहा है and we'll डंडा पड़ेगा it's
Yeah,
whether we care about it ethically or we care about the danda, that's the
yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people definitely care about Danda, but I think Apple is one of the most beautiful examples of selling on privacy, right? I think that is one of the best things. I kind of keep repeating, and I also learn from them, that how they have very well played, and for every customer today, privacy is important, right? Even when I talk to my parents nowadays, they're like, okay, will my data be shared too much, or should I not have this application? And I feel better that when I go back home, concern is there, and true concern is there with every consumer in the world, that they want privacy, and obviously when you want it, the government has to give it. So I think we are right on track around the world to ask for it. So we're talking about privacy, right? We're talking about privacy in edtech and fintech, since we started the session kind of. But why do you think, right, why is it so important, right? Why is privacy so important for, and what would it do, Samrat? What is the end result, right? We're talking about the train we are taking, but what is that sweet end result of taking this train of privacy as a principle for any company in the world?
Let me break my answer into like three broad points. The first one is privacy is important because it's the right thing to do principally, and it doesn't have to necessarily we have the 2017 judgment and all of that, and that's because the interpretation was such that privacy became a part of article 21 of the constitution. But even if it had gone the other way, and I mean, we need to understand that privacy is important for everyone because at the end of the day it helps society as a whole, because we know that we can trust the companies that we are consuming or customers of, and because we can trust the companies to ensure that whatever our transactions are, whatever we are doing, is not revealed to the person next door. And I feel that there's a misconception where people think that Indians are not, they don't care about privacy that much. We are always interested in seeing ki neighbor ke ghar pe kya ho raha hai, whatever, but I feel I would like to push back on that and say that we are a society where we care about privacy of the important things, like salary information. If something is important to us, we care about privacy. And many years back in India, there was a case law where the key case is called Mr. X versus Hospital Y, and X and Y is just to denote maintain the privacy because the patient had AIDS. And um, and then there was a case law surrounding it because that person's information got leaked. But at that point in time also, we did care, and the court also took the view that if someone has a life-threatening disease, then they have the privacy, they have the medical privacy to keep it to themselves. And these are just two examples where we can see if the issues are big enough, we care about privacy. Right now, the problem is that we don't understand what the privacy issue is unless we are trained as privacy lawyers or professionals or technical experts. And the problem is that all of these companies which are mining data are dealing in human futures. They're surveilling individuals and dealing in individual futures where they're predicting human behavior and selling it to their customers. The misnomer is that we are actually not the customers of a free service. And this is, a famous tagline that if you're not paying for something, then you are the product, right? And that's super true. If you're not paying for a service, if you're not paying for services on the internet, it's not free. Then you're the product. You're being sold, and your future behavior and activity, you will buy this product, or you may go abroad for a trip, or whatever it is. All of that data is being mined, packaged, and sold to the highest bidder. That could be it could be a hotel company, it could be a travel agent, it could be a financial services company, it could be an educational institution trying to sell you a master's degree. It can be anyone. And all of this is effectively reducing your autonomy, because हमें नहीं भी पता चलता है, indirectly all of this bombardment of ads on different platforms at the end of the day is influencing and nudging us towards certain products or to buying stuff. And the question is not whether it's right or wrong. The question is that our autonomy is subconsciously reduced because we don't even realize it. Because behind that screen, there is a team of data scientists, engineers, constantly scrutinizing every single click, every single movement of your keyboard, of your mouse, of your, of the touch screen on your phone. And all of this is carefully logged and processed to sell your future activity to the highest bidder, and which is why we should care about privacy.
Yeah, I think very fairly put forward, right? I think Samrat, I think very. But
Yeah,
Soumya has a question for you. So
yeah.
in British Airways case in 2018, the airline suffered a cyber attack, and the card details, including the CVV numbers of the customers, were accessible to attackers, right? The court ruled that adequate measures are to be taken by airline and fined for lack of adequate. So the question is, do we have adequate security measures in India? That's a
Okay.
question.
So the first question is, what is adequate security measures? What is adequate? Okay, now what is adequate to me as a company may not be adequate for the government or the regulator, or it may not be adequate for someone else unless we have clear standards which are laid down. In India, under the IT Act, we have ISO 27001 standard. So that's one adequacy measure, that you are ISO 27001 compliant. There's also the ISO 27701 for personal data. So these are some of the standards that you can sort of comply with. Then there are, of course, under the GDPR, since the Max Schrems case, I'm sure most of you are aware of it, where data, the US EU safe harbor was struck down. Subsequent to that, in the next 1 year, 2 years, it's very gray now what's going to happen with data transfers outside India. But on the point of adequate security measures, nowadays companies in Europe are using supplemental measures such as encryption, and also standard contractual clauses where they're saying that, okay, these contractually you're liable if you send the data to XYZ party. If it's within your ecosystem, it needs to be within your group companies, and only certain individuals will have access rights to that data. So ऐसा नहीं कि organization में दे दिया तो from the HR to the top management to all engineers to, like, whoever else has access to the data. It has to be restricted on a need to know basis. So these are some of the ways in which you can take adequate security measures.
Yeah, one of the things I would like to add, because when we look at Article 32, right, it's and a lot of people come and ask, how do we satisfy this, right?
Yeah.
What is that check mark when I'm doing a GDPR gap assessment to the companies, or I'm building a framework for them, and then obviously when you build a framework, then you have all these requirements in the framework, and then the question comes up, Article 32, right? And do you have adequate security measures? So it's very, very difficult to quantify this, but one of the very closer certifications that companies usually have is ISO 27001, and that's where, and if you're in Europe, obviously you will have an ISO, but if you're in US, you will have mostly a SOC 2 type 2. So I think those are the two very close certifications to give more assurance on security. Depends, it's a product or a process. But coming back to the point, I have one more question for you, Samrat. So how do we take guardians consent, right, when we are taking, so let's take an example, right, where let's take an example for an app on the mobile where kids play the game. So the game is for kids, right? So
Yeah.
obviously, if it's a kids game, then the consent has to come from the guardian, right? Obviously, if
Yeah.
he's like below some age, certain age, in Sweden it's like
Yeah.
11, 12 years. So, but still
Yeah.
talking about, let's agree that it's a child,
Yeah.
Samrat. So what do you think, right? It's how should we take guardians' consent? Have you any ideas on this, or have you seen this happening? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the how question is not a legal question; it's a technical question.
Mm.
But I'm happy to sort of give you my ideas off the top of my head. But yeah, you're right. If say a child is playing a video game and consent needs to be taken from parents, um, this is an issue. And I'm
So
just thinking
sometimes,
through.
yeah. So what I have seen, I'll give you one example. So when we go to school admissions, right? So when we go to school admissions, we get these forms, but the signature is done by parents. So that is
Yeah.
one example that comes to top of my mind right now because we're discussing this. So in school,
So
usually it's a guardian's consent.
no, so I was looking at more like from tech platforms point of view.
Okay.
I know for a fact that the Italian Data Protection Authority has fined TikTok for
Yeah.
violating um, age verification mechanisms, and then they have put in a more robust age verification mechanism in Italy only. I think I don't know if they've rolled it out across Europe. I don't use TikTok, so I mean I haven't checked it, but you can, if any one of you is interested, you can maybe use a VPN, log into TikTok Italy and see. I think they use a like a video verification of who the person is and to check the age, because that's the first thing. How do you know if it's a child or not? Because most companies will be like कि हमें तो नहीं पता child है यार. That person has said कि they're 18 or they're 19. So one way to circumvent is to simply be like, what is your age? If it's less than 18, then then follow something else. But
Yeah.
most people will say they're not. They're 19. So children are forced to lie in this sort of situation because they want access to the game, right? So they're like, we are 19. So now the company is like, the onus is not us. That child has lied and said 19. मतलब हम क्या कर सकते हैं? झूठ बोला.
Yeah.
We haven't
I
done
think
anything wrong.
I think that's what we call the dark pattern, right? The
Exactly.
so
That's
yeah.
that's a classic example of, actually no, this is not a dark pattern. It's actually very clear. Dark pattern is usually when someone is being nudged to do something. In this, you're not being nudged. You're being asked, and to get access, you need to be honest, right? But what most people don't realize that this is something that we discussed in the Sri Krishna Committee report. And if anyone, one of you is interested, then you should read the chapter on guardian data fiduciaries in the Sri Krishna Committee report. We actually thought about it a fair bit in the Sri Krishna Committee, and we flipped it, where this sort of consent requirement is changed to where guardian data fiduciaries have a higher responsibility. So, in case it's a child, you can't block access to a service because it's a child. Still have to give access, but you have to ensure that their data is not collected for advertisements or not
Yeah.
sent outside India or whatever. So I know your question was, हम consent कैसे ले सकते हैं? But the in Shri Krishna Committee, we thought and we flipped it around, where we are like, okay, this is the wrong question to ask. The point is not that we don't want children to access. Okay, we may not want them to access certain things, but by and large, not games. We want children. Obviously, children will be playing games, right? But their data should not be misused. So children ka data should not be sent for advertisements. It should not be mined. It should be, you know, minimally collected, whatever is necessary for the game to run. So that is the answer, that we effectively use children's data more carefully, and we don't expose them to targeted advertising at such a young age.
Yeah. So Samrat, I think we're very end towards the end of the session, right? So guys, if you want to connect with Samrat, Samrat's LinkedIn is here, right? Just a click away, and I know Samrat always responds super quickly. So if you have any questions and you want to reach out to Samrat and have a discussion with him,
Yeah, generally as well, if you want to know what
yeah,
it's like to move from India to the Netherlands and to work as a lawyer. Happy to.
yeah, I think we should do
It's
the next session on that in Academy. So, so
yeah,
Samrat, thanks a ton
yeah,
for taking our special request, right? With your special time, I know you gave us 1 hour, in the afternoon of your day. So
yeah.
thanks a ton for coming online. and helping us with all these tough questions, and sharing such interesting perspectives of yours, because the perspective that you have comes from a very mature privacy thought process, right? And that
Yeah.
is unique, right? That is very less even in industry across the world. So thanks a ton for bringing your mature thought process to our session, and over to you.
Akash,
Yeah.
sorry, just before ending it, I
Hmm.
see a couple of questions, and is an additional layer of verification necessary for data controller apart from age verification in case of a minor?
Okay.
So, see, age verification is something that we know is, doesn't work. So, obviously, an additional layer of verification is important. If it's not mandated by the law, then no one is going to do it because it will just increase costs because someone will have to monitor it, and they'll have to set up technical systems around it. But I think what TikTok has done in Italy is something that can be easily done, and it's already being done for KYC, right? There's a KYC circular where you can take a video, take a photo, and take a live video, and then do your KYC online. So similarly, I think for apps, this is something that can definitely be implemented, and this will go a long way to ensure that children are better protected in India. But this is something that can only come from the government and from the parliament, and in the form of legislation, because no company will want to invest so much money unless they are compelled to do so. So I think that's one. And I think there was one more quick question. Hello, sir. Do you think we need a special data protection bill for children, especially marginalized students? So the data protection bill generally is a horizontal law, which is applicable on everyone. So I think that's a baseline law that's required. And then sector-specific regulation could be required for different use cases. The specific use case that you mentioned is something that will really be looked into. I don't want to say yes or no, but there are a few use cases which are definitely important, such as medical information and data, right? Financial information. So some of these use cases there needs to be, or like banking information. RBI already has a lot of sector-specific rules for data. For example, data localization is mandated by RBI. So I think the data protection law is the baseline horizontal law कि ये तो minimum standard है. उसके बाद whatever sector specific laws are there for insurance, for medical devices, for banking are required. Yeah. And yeah, I can quickly share one article that I've written a few years back on medical data also, if anyone's interested to read. So yeah.
So no, it's thank you for answering this, and I know you come from a background where you have been teaching. And I can see that you explain it so well, right? Everything, because obviously I can see that explanation thought process well. But we were very happy to have you here. And I know there are tons of other questions that we would like you to take up for other people as well. And let's keep doing this, right? Let's keep doing this, and meet other people again, maybe next month or somewhere down the line, and try to answer some questions, right? But thank you for joining the session, Samrat, and it's a privilege to have you here.
Yeah.
Over to you for a short thank you note.
Thank you. I mean, thank you so much, Akash, for having me here. And yeah, I mean, we've known each other for a little over a year now, and it's been great. I've seen Tsaaro grow in the last 1 year, and so happy that you're doing well. And yeah, I mean, I'm always there if you need me, for anything, and
Yeah.
for all the participants as well. If you have any questions on privacy law, drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to help. Or if you want guidance with respect to your career in privacy, I'm happy to help.
Yeah. I think everybody here feels super privileged that you say that, Samrat. And thank you everyone who joined the session, and have a nice day, guys, and have a nice day, Samrat. I will see you. Yeah.
Yeah.